I'll just go ahead and get started. Leigh, thank you for being here. Part of our BCSC School Board candidate interviews.
Yes.
I'll just go ahead and get started. Um, Obviously, a large focus of BCSC and school districts around the state is on the foundational reading skills for second and third graders. How do you think BCSC is doing in helping those students along, and how might you contribute in ensuring those students have the best shot at passing iRead?
So I feel that the efforts that they're making are excellent. I was a participant as a book buddy, just as one example, and I never expected to have the interaction that I had with the child and the connection to this child, and I won't name his name for obvious reasons, but it was a joy to be able to go in every week. And the first few weeks he was just sort of ambivalent, and by about that fourth, fifth week he looked forward to me coming there. And I knew that I had hit a moment when he, just as children will, we were reading a book together, and he just very lightly put his head right here against my arm. And I thought, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then his reading picked up. I saw the difference just with the one child, with that one effort made. So that's one example that I know BCSC is doing to improve reading. The other thing that they're doing is our teachers are fantastic talents at taking everything that's available to them and applying it into the classroom and giving these kids options. Many welcome parent volunteers. I was one. I was welcomed into my child's K6 classes for both of my girls. I was a regular there. I was even asked by a student if I worked there. I'm like, no, I don't work here, but I feel like it. But I would work with kids, and teachers welcomed the volunteering of parents to come in and work with kids. So being open to the community coming in and helping out. There's another example. The new legislation for the science of reading. That's more of a state thing, but the Department of Education is pushing for our teachers to be certified in the science of reading. I believe it's an 80 credit program, or an 80-hour program that teachers can participate in. Sadly, also have to pay for it and on the free time to do it. And our corporation is encouraging the teachers in every way that they can to encourage that access to that information. IU Columbus, for example, has recently added a master's program in the science of reading. So that's a local relationship that BCSC already has with IU Columbus, and teachers can come there for that master's degree to get that certification. And all of that certification time spent on that science of reading program can also apply to their PGP points, which are their growth points toward their license that they have to earn every 5 years. So it's a collaboration of a lot of things. One, internally, they're working with what they have locally. They have volunteers locally, community members, book buddies, parent volunteers coming into the classroom. That's local. At the state's pushing the science of reading, and BCSC is doing what they can to encourage teachers with that relationship they have with their local university to allow teachers to work toward a master's degree, not just a certification, a master's degree, which in the end can only benefit them because they'll have that extra education.
Alrighty.
I'm sure there's others out there. That's what I know about.
Moving along, what are your thoughts on Envision 2030, BCSC's facilities plan? Because obviously, if elected,
Yes.
you'll be in charge of shepherding that process through.
It's excellent. So I've looked at it, and the Envision 2030 program took a lot of vision, obviously Envision. They're looking to fully renovate Schmidt, Northside, and Smith coming up. They're currently in process of wrapping up renovations at the Richard L. Johnson Care Center, where we have our youngest busy bees and our youngest preschoolers. The Parkside was just completed. It's beautiful. My children attended there, and that school was built in the 60s. And I remember when my children attended, they had jobs in the 5th and 6th grade that when it rained, certain kids were assigned the 5-gallon buckets to go down the hall to find the drip spots to catch the raindrops so that Mr. Moe could empty the buckets timely. That's not a problem anymore. And the school was renovated with good thought, good intention, teacher input, architect input. So I was pleased with that just from what I've seen and down the street from my home. We're looking at a new elementary school, and that seems to be a hot point right now. But that new elementary school, in my opinion, is absolutely needed. We have nearly 1,000 students packed into Southside. It's a great school, no doubt about it. We have neighborhoods across the street from Southside whose children attend that school. There are children who live across the street from Southside who don't attend Southside because they have to get on a bus at 6:30 a.m. in the morning in the dark, and they're bused to another elementary school because there's no room left at the end, so to speak. So while our population's not increasing as a city, what is happening is our population is shifting to the west of town for young new families. Our 3-bedroom homes are out there. They're across the street from Southside. There's just no more room left at Southside. So the new location is also excellent. It's up 46 in between ABC Montessori and the Westside Community Church. It's beautiful, beautiful property. I drove by it and just took a look. They've presented at the school board meeting a floor plan that they're happy with. They've named a principal. They have teachers already identified who are all contributing to how they want the layout of this plan to look while working collaboratively with the architect. So just that team approach is great. And what I love that our school board is doing is our school board has put competent people in place, and they're standing back and they're allowing them to go figure it out, make the decision without nosing in and deciding for them how it's supposed to go. So I'm a huge fan of that new elementary school because I don't think 5-year-olds need to be on a bus at 6:30 in the morning in the dark when they can go to a school that's within a reasonable distance from their home. And in the meantime, too, we can take Southside down from a small city of 1,000 students to something that's a bit more manageable, while building into another school and creating a capacity for both schools to still grow as we move west, as the population rather moves west of town.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think teachers are being compensated adequately, and what can BCSC do to improve retention and recruitment?
So adequately, we're never going to compensate teachers adequately. When we stop having bake sales for schools to be able to run themselves appropriately, and we're not running bake sales to buy a fighter jet, for example, it's never going to be adequate. But what we can do is we can encourage teachers to stay in our corporation, and we can value what they do. So there was a referendum in 2020, and before the referendum, our teachers were making below the state average. Now, since the referendum, on average, their salaries have increased by over 9%, around 9%, give or take, depending on what teacher is what with salary. And those teachers' salaries having increased by 9%, well, when the referendum ends in 2028, the question becomes, all right, now what? What do we do now? So the referendum just last year alone brought in about $9.1 million. And of that $9.1 million, around 2/3 of it went to teacher salaries. That's the 9% figure I mentioned. In 2028, when the referendum ends, we're going to naturally be met with, what do we do now? And in my opinion, the referendum that's coming up in 2028 to the school board, whether you agree with the referendum or not, whether you as a voter will vote for it or not, it's your job as a school board member to prepare the verbiage to go on the ballot for the voters to decide. This should not be left up to 4 rogue school board members to decide for the voters. 61% of voters said yes to the referendum. We want to compensate our teachers. We need to give the voters that opportunity again in 2028 and let them decide. The amount of the referendum may not be the same, but we absolutely need to leave it to the voters to decide. It's not up to the school board to decide. Our job is to write the policy, write the verbiage, and then let the voters decide. There was more to that question, and I need you to remind me.
Oh, it was just, do you think teachers are being compensated adequately, and what can BCSC do to improve teacher retention?
Okay, so I think it goes without saying I'm in favor of the referendum. I did vote for it in 2020. If it were presented to me as a voter in 2028, I will likely vote for it again. As a school board member, my intention is to make sure the verbiage appears on the ballot for the voters to decide.
All righty. Just a couple more here.
Yes.
The board has devoted a sizable amount of time in school board meetings during the past 10 months, both during regular business and also during public comment. There's been a source of a lot of input from the community. The accessibility of certain library materials. Do you think BCSC has the correct policy in place for addressing these concerns? And would you like to see anything else additional be done?
I'm very satisfied with the policy. As I recall, the policy number is 9130. And so that everyone knows, that policy didn't just show up on the books last year. When I started teaching in Bartholomew County at North High School 32 years ago, we had that policy on the books. So if a parent came in and said, I'm not comfortable with my child reading this material, for example, then the school would allow the teacher and the parent to come up with a compromise. In every memory that I can recall from 32 years ago, there was never a time that it had to go beyond the teacher and the parent. Later, when my children attended North High School, I remember having a conversation with a friend. She was unhappy with one of the AP books that had been on the AP list for English I forget I think it was, I don't think it's W131, but it was the AP course. And one of the titles in the book was not to her liking. She went to the principal and she wanted the book taken off the list. And he explained again, this is something that you can do with your teacher. And then he redirected her, which I appreciated very much, that the principal redirected the parent to work it out with the teacher. But what she wanted was for none of the students to read this book because she was just opposed to it. So we had just a private friend conversation, and I said, hey, I'm okay with the book. It's on the AP list. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with my kids reading it. And we had a friendly back and forth about, well, don't you think this and don't you think that? And I said, no, I don't, but I respect that you do. And there's a policy in place for you to say, I don't want my son to read the book. So she went through with that, and her son was given an alternative assignment, and my child was allowed to read the book, and that was the end of it. I never thought another thing about it until last year, when it feels as if we're revisiting something that we have proactive policy in place. It works. If a parent doesn't want their child to read something, they are directed either to the librarian if the book's in the library, or they're directed to the teacher if it's a teacher assignment. And a parent and a teacher or a librarian can have the conversation, and then there's another alternative for the child that's found. That's a very good policy. It allows parents to parent their own and does not allow parents to inflict upon other parents and their choices. So I'm a fan of the policy. I think policy 9130 works. The reason why it came back up in the legislation last year was because the legislation said, hey, we're going to add a few little things to this that include timelines. So the one thing our policy lacked previously was a written timeline. It was never a problem, but okay, it wasn't in writing. So the school board last year readdressed it and said, okay, we're going to add the timeline as per the state, because that's one of the jobs of the school board, is to remain compliant with what the state says, and that's what we did. And you're right, there was a lot of time spent on that. What I understand opponents of the policy is they're looking for an opt-in only policy, and I'm a better fan of an opt-out policy. Because I think that it infringes less on the general public and the majority of the general public than a policy that wants every book to be decided if your child can read it or not, and you must opt into a policy. I'm not a fan of opt-in. I think opt-out is the better way to go because it infringes less on families, on parents, and their own personal decisions.
All right, last one.
Yes.
In recent years, school board races and school board meetings themselves have become increasingly charged.
Yes.
How would you work with others that you may not agree with on a specific subject if elected?
I've been attending these school board meetings now for almost a year and a half, all of them. I think I missed 2 because I was home visiting my mom, but I listened. And when I listened to the meetings, I realized that's the solution to bringing civility back to our school board. We have to listen. And I find when meetings are the most contentious and the most charged, it's because individuals are planning what they're going to say next instead of listening to what's being said. So I think as a school board member, I would have to go in with no agenda, and I have to listen. Oftentimes the electricity in the room is because the side that's speaking, who's the most charged, feels disenfranchised, doesn't feel heard. And that's one thing I've learned as a teacher over the years, that oftentimes the tears from a student have less to do with the assignment, and they have more to do with the fact that they don't feel they're being heard. So that's going to be a very important piece to bringing civility back, is not raising your voice, is not just coming to the table and being willing to listen and take a deep breath before you speak. So I think that's the number one thing we can all do.
All right, Leigh, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.